Welcome to the Covered Bridges of New Hampshire podcast, where we discuss all things related to covered bridges in the Granite State. Here's your host, Kim Chandler.
Hello, Covered Bridge people, and welcome to the podcast. Today we're talking with two people who were instrumental in the 2021 rehabilitation of the Bement Bridge in Bradford. Town Administrator Karen Hambleton and engineer Josif Bicja from Hoyle Tanner shared their experience with the project and walk us through a $1.6 million renovation of an historic covered bridge. Here we go. In this episode, we will learn about the 2021 rehabilitation of the Bement Bridge in Bradford. The Bement Bridge was originally constructed in 1854 across the Warner River. The bridge received extensive repairs in 1947, 1969, and again in 2011. It was during these repairs it was identified that the bridge needed considerable work. It would take over a decade for that work to be finished. Today we're talking with two folks who made that work happen. Karen Hambleton, Bradford's town administrator, and project manager Josif Bicja from the engineering firm of Hoyle Tanner. Josif is a project manager with Hoyle Tanner and has over 18 years of experience in the inspection, evaluation, rehabilitative, and new design of numerous types of bridges. Josif has co-authored several historic bridge papers. He also serves as the president of the Structural Engineers of New Hampshire and holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of New Hampshire. Karen has worked for the town of Bradford for 7 years, serving as its town administrator since 2016. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of New Hampshire and has over 30 years of experience in the administration of higher education, nonprofit, and municipal organizations. She has lived in Bradford and has been an active member of the community since 2004. Welcome to the podcast.
Glad you could have us here.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to me. Karen, in 2011, the town recognized that the Bement Bridge was in need of work, and at the time, the estimate was $772,000. Can you tell us about that? Like, what condition was the bridge in, and what was the work that was needed?
There had been some snow damage the previous winter. There were, a number of recent repairs. The roof had been replaced a couple of years before that. Planking was, the deck planks, some of them had been replaced. Some of them were in need of further replacement. And I think it was a little bit after we'd actually entered into the process of applying for the grant and beginning work on the building that a sinkhole developed behind the north abutment. Again, just deferred maintenance catching up with us and the bridge kind of screaming for some attention. So it needed it. It's also, a pretty frequently used bridge in town.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the National Historic Covered Bridge Preservation Program grant, and the town received a grant for $617,600. How does one apply for a National Historic Covered Bridge Preservation Program grant? I would imagine that's not an easy process.
It was. I actually was not the person who did that. Cheryl Bear, the previous town administrator, put that grant in. It was one of the last ones granted, so one does not go about getting those grants anymore, unfortunately.
Right.
We were so lucky to get that because it really it funded a huge part of this project. But she did an extensive grant and submitted it, I believe, in 2011. We were awarded the grant in 2012. Again, the initial estimate was 772, of which they were funding the 619. Mm-hmm. That's a big chunk.
Yes, it is.
I could add a few words to that, Kim, if you don't mind. Sure,
please.
Yeah, that's quite a grant. We have done a lot of past covered bridge rehabilitation projects under that program, and it's unfortunate that they discontinued. That program was running from 2000 to 2012. I had some time before the meeting. I looked up some stats here for you. So that program provided almost $87 million in funding for covered bridge rehabilitation projects all over the country, which is amazing. And then they stopped it in 2012. The Congress did not renew that program. We are no strangers to this program. We've done a lot of work in New Hampshire, Vermont, and other states as well. And I was adding up the numbers for us, and we had done 10% of that funding. The projects that we were involved, Hoyle Tanner, we had done almost $9 million in work under that program, on mostly in New England, not so much outside New England. And here in New Hampshire, to give some more stats on that program, they funded 10 projects in New Hampshire, 10 covered bridge projects, and we were involved in 4 of them. So a lot of towns got that funding. They were very fortunate, and now it's very hard to get any funding for those historic bridges. They compete with other transportation projects that have different needs. And my understanding is that Cheryl did a lot of work back in early 2011, 2012. She worked closely with New Hampshire DOT, administrator of the bridge design there at the DOT, and with support of the Charlie Bass, the congressional district representative at that time, and then the state historic preservation officer and the local federal highway administration office. They put an application together, and they came up with that estimate, which was a little bit low to begin with, but any funding, anything helps in this kind of situation. So that was the starting point at that time frame with that program.
And wasn't the Bement covered bridge on the red list at that point in time?
It was.
I believe it was. That was another thing that kind of bumped it up in terms of priority. It was also, go ahead.
And it was right after you mentioned that damage on the roof where the unbalanced snow load on the roof caused some of the trusses to sway sideways, and there was a shift of as much as 2 feet according to the New Hampshire DOT report that I have here in front of me. So that was very concerning, and the town took some action. They replaced the roof at that time, and they put a metal standing seam roof, which helps a lot because the snow doesn't collect on top of the roof with those kind of roofs, and it slides right off. So that eliminated a lot of that problem. But the other problems that you had at that time, Karen, was the sinkholes that you mentioned. Right after that same winter, the sinkhole developed there was pretty large sinkhole. I think it was like 6 feet wide by 8 foot deep. Yeah. And then the town had to dig out all the pavement, all the backfill around it, and then put a lot of concrete that we knew about. So when we went to rehabilitate the project, we had notes on the plan to let the contractor know there's a lot of concrete here that you have to take apart by breaking it down and just removing it. Otherwise, there was going to be a big change order for unforeseen conditions and whatnot. So a lot of history behind that north abutment that we ended up replacing.
Thank you for sharing that.
Steering back to the funding. So because it was red listed, we'd also put the bridge on the New Hampshire State Municipal Bridge Program to get the 80/20 funding there. So that was another huge chunk of funding.
Right. And so the works, Joseph's firm got involved in 2017, which is six years. And by then the project estimate had jumped to 1.2 million. Why did it take so long for the work to happen? Is that a normal amount of time for a bridge project, or was it held up?
Well, Joseph was involved before then. I think it was late 2015. Hoyle Tanner, we went through the process of selecting an engineering firm, and we were so fortunate to get Joseph and Hoyle Tanner. He just put his heart and soul in this project. So it actually did start a few years before that. We do an engineering study. I remember Joseph coming back from that and saying, well, it's going to cost about another $500,000 to do what really needs to be done. The board and I think the town didn't hesitate with that, but it was, okay, now we need to find some funding. We also had some easement issues and dealing with a right-of-way within a butter, and that took a little bit of time to get through. But I don't know, Joseph, if this is the only other bridge project I have been involved with. I came in at the very end of, I don't know, this did seem to take a while to get off the ground.
It did. It took a while for the town to hear from the federal government, the funding, and then you got to make sure that you follow all their processes. And it's a lot of processes, a lot of strings attached with that funding that comes, and it just takes time. We got involved, as Karen mentioned, in 2015, and then we looked at doing a full inspection of the bridge. We identified the damage, and we came to the town on the public meeting, I remember, and we said that these are all the things that we think that we recommend that you have to do, and they listened to our recommendations. And then at that meeting, we also had a representative from New Hampshire DOT, C.R. Willicke. So he was at that meeting, and he was open to go back to his office and find more funding. So the town was pretty fortunate that they were able to fund that portion, that additional overage, with 80% of the match coming from the state, and then town was responsible for 20% of the overage. So just the process, the federal process that you go through.
Karen, you mentioned that the town was very quick to want to save the bridge. Was there any conversation about taking the bridge down, not putting it back? Never.
Nope.
Excellent.
Nope.
That's amazing.
Well, it's right in the sort of the heart of, it's not on Main Street, but it's very much in the view of people passing through town on Route 103. Mm-hmm. Our little town newspaper is called the Bradford Bridge, and uses the Bement Bridge as its logo. So it's a part of our community.
Yeah. I think that's a message I've received in doing the research for the New Hampshire Covered Bridge book, is that these communities feel very passionate about saving these covered bridges, when it would be easier, maybe faster, I don't know, just to put up something different. And they're still here, I think, in a lot of respects, because these small communities don't want to see them go.
Yeah, it would definitely be easier to go and put a steel beam there with a concrete deck. A lot easier, a lot less maintenance for the town. But the town was committed on retaining that history behind the covered bridge and retaining as much of the historic fabric as possible.
Right.
We also had the option, when it came down to replacing the north abutment, of throwing a concrete abutment in there, or doing something that sort of mimicked the other side, which was all granite still. And the towns chose to spend extra money to put the granite in there, just to, again, keep the historic fabric and feel.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. Josif, what condition was the bridge by the time you started working on it? It was 167 years old.
That's a great question. Usually when engineers would get involved, that means that there's definitely something wrong with it, If there wasn't anything wrong with it, then why would you call the engineer?
Right.
So the bridge was in rough shape. It had some issues that we alluded earlier with the roof. There were a lot of work done over the years at different times. And one of the major disadvantages of doing the work by different contractors and at a different time frames, you always end up getting not necessarily the right contractor for the job. So you may get whoever you may get, and they do the work, and then you find out when you do this major rehab that things were not done up to the standards that we always follow on the rehabilitation of the covered bridge project. So that's usually a major disadvantage. But the bridge was in rough shape. I remember the decking. The road agent constantly had to go there. He had to replace certain boards. At one point, he also had to put the steel plates to cover some of the decking area from unraveling and causing harm to bicycles. And I remember there were quite a people that were complaining before we got involved. As I was reviewing the meeting minutes from the select board meetings, just people were constantly complaining that the deck needs to be replaced, something needs to happen. So there were quite a few things. And then the major factor that drove the project, and that the town got the funding, that was a contributing factor, was the north abutment that we spoke earlier, that it was in very rough condition. When you went underneath the bridge, just seeing all the abutment, it looked like at any minute that abutment was going to slide over and give away, and then the whole bridge was going to come down with it. So that was the driving factor that drove the whole project as to the point where we got involved, and then the funding and the repairs that we had to do.
Well, that north abutment, when you looked at it from the opposite side, it was half stone that was sort of sloppily laid and half concrete. And you kind of wonder, like, how does that really support this bridge?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, the work was done at different times. The original work was stone, and then the concrete, I believe, was put in into the 60s when they were trying to restrain the abutment from moving any further. And then that's what you got. You got just a mixture of materials, and it looked ugly. It was definitely ugly. You compare the two abutments, you say, there's no way that the same contractor built the south abutment, which looked beautiful, and it really had no issues with it. And then you look at the north abutment and you wonder like how the bridge is still standing there and not falling down.
Wow. And because the funding came from the federal government and also from the state, I imagine there are special restrictions or things that you have to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, there's a lot of strings attached with that federal funding. There's more process, more paperwork, but we have to follow that. You know, it's still more cost effective for the town to get that funding than fund everything on their own. Mm-hmm. So from the start, from the get-go, the town had to go through a qualification selection process to select the engineer. So that's what they did. They interviewed, they advertised the project. A lot of different firms submitted, and they went through the interview process. We prepared a proposal. We came to the town. We got interviewed. We showed our qualifications, and then they selected the firm that they wanted to do the work, that they were convinced that they were going to do the work, and not necessarily getting any kind of engineering firm there that may not have done this work on the past. So we are fortunate to get selected by the town because we love this kind of work. I've worked on a lot of covered bridges over the years on my career, and when I graduated from UNH and then I got this job here, I could not believe that I get paid to do this kind of work. Like this is awesome. It's super exciting. And I'm still surprised that there's so many covered bridges out there in rough shape, and the towns sometimes don't do the right thing. But hats off to the town of Bradford to being committed and getting the project done the right way. So a lot of steps. You have to go through the federal process. The DOT has their process, and we have to make so many different submissions. The right of the way process took a while. We had to get some easements from a nearby abutter, and that took over a year, if I remember correctly.
I think it was closer to 18 months. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you still had to condition that easement with a verbiage saying that on the next town meeting, we're going to discontinue the right of the way and give back that easement area back to them. So it was a little bit tricky for the town to navigate through the process and follow all the regulations and then finally get the project constructed. The construction was the fun part. The first part is just like the paperwork, and the engineering is usually the easy part, to design the member that you're replacing or whatever you're doing. All the paperwork is the thing that we don't always enjoy, but we have to do it because otherwise you would not get the funding.
Right. I don't know too many people that enjoy busy paperwork, but someone probably does somewhere.
Not us.
No. And so you mentioned the bidding process for your firm. Karen, can you talk about how Daniels Construction ended up being hired in May of 2020?
Sure. So once the engineering study was done, then we actually went out again and, went through the engineering selection process for project engineering, and once again chose Hoyle Tanner to continue with that. They were already intimately involved with the project. And so we worked with them. They finalized plans. We got the plans out, went out to bid in early May, I think, of 2020, selected somebody towards the end of May. It was very quick. One of the requirements for the contractors submitting bids was that they had to have done covered bridge work within, I believe it was the last 10 or 20 years. They had to have been recently working on bridges, and everybody had to be pre-qualified by the state of New Hampshire because there was the state and federal money funding involved. So, Daniels was chosen. They seemed to have a solid approach to the bridge. Their price was right. So,
right.
Yeah, can I add a few more words on that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Please.
If you don't mind. So Karen is right for everything she said. The pre-qualification process was very important. The New Hampshire DOT has their own pre-qualifications, but it really doesn't cover the specialty work with the cover bridge and the historic structures. So we ended up adopting the one that we always do on our projects. Hoyle Tanner has our own process. So we have a questionnaire. We send it to the contractors that are interested in the project, and then they send the paperwork back to us with the qualifications and things they have done on the last 10 years. So we went through that process before advertising the project because we didn't want any contractor to come and give us a price because it's very hard once you get that price from contractors. It's very hard to disqualify them after the fact. After you see that, oh my God, they could do this work for $500,000, but the next contractor could do it at 1.5 or 1.6. So the pre-qualification process is very important to sort out the right contractors and the qualified contractors. So we're fortunate that we knew most of the contractors in the region, and we had quite a bit of interest. I think we had 4 or 5 contractors, if I remember correctly, that we pre-qualified and that were interested. And I could not have been happier to work with Daniels. They were a really great contractor. And again, it comes down to the passion that their workers had. They didn't want to make a killing on the profit on this project. They wanted just to do the right thing. They never hit us with any change orders. It was always a working relationship back and forth between us, the town, and the contractor, and just doing the right thing. And most of the time, even going above and beyond what we expected. So we are very happy with how the whole construction process went. We had meetings, we had lots of check-ins, and as we say, trust by verify. So we definitely trusted the contractor, but we also had to verify that the work was being done up to our standards and also meeting the design specifications and all of that. So I could not have been happier myself working with them.
Yeah, they did a great job, and it's a beautiful product.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Thank you. That's great when everybody, all parties can come together and work together. It makes the project run a lot more smoothly, I would think.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so we talked about the substructure and that north abutment looked like it wasn't going to hold up for much longer. So the project started with moving the bridge. How does one move a 50-ton bridge? Can you explain that?
Very carefully.
There was quite a process that we went through. So the one thing that we've learned over the years on those covered bridge projects is that you do not want to specify to the contractor how to do the work. You always provide the constraints, you tell them what you're trying to achieve, and then you let them figure it out how to do it. And the beauty of that is that you let them be creative. You let them do the thing that they do best. Rather than the engineer dictating how to do their work, you tell them, this is what I'm looking for. You figure it out how to do it. So we've learned over the years that you get the best price from the contractor by allowing them to be creative and come up with their own ways of supporting the structure and moving it and getting the project done. So that's exactly what we did here. We had it open-ended. The one thing that I wish we had done different during the wetland permitting process, we had to get several permits from New Hampshire DES. And one of those permits, it's always minimize. You always need to minimize the impacts. And then we always get a lot of pressure from the permitting agencies not to overestimate the area that we need to disturb. And that's one thing that I wish I had done different in hindsight, just going back, that we had a larger area permitted. But when we got the submittal from the contractor, they wanted to go beyond the area that we had permitted on the plan. So we had to backtrack. We had to look back and go to the permitting agency, to New Hampshire DS, and we had to ask them for amending the permit. So usually that process is cumbersome. It's another department at New Hampshire DS that you have to coordinate. You have to wait. They have their own regulations. They're shorthanded. They don't have enough staff. But we are pretty fortunate that we had to make a phone call. We talked to them. And then in a matter of a week and a half or so, we ended up getting that permit amended. And then the contractor was ready to go, move the impacts beyond to what were shown on the plans as approved by New Hampshire DES. And then we went through that process. And the move was actually the easy part, just getting all the steel there and getting all the shoring in place, welding it together, assembling it, bolting it together. That was the hard part. The easy part was putting the rollers underneath the bridge and essentially basically just with some cables and come along, just pulling it across from one side to the other side. So the whole process, it looked like it was hard and it looked like it went a lot of effort into that, but it was probably one of the easiest things, the actual move. And before the final move, when we had Concord Monitor and WMUR, whoever we had there, we had practiced like a week before. We had moved the bridge on the new abutment because we didn't want to be on the situation where everyone was thinking, oh my God, those guys don't know what they're doing. So
The bridge slides into the river or something, you know.
So during that move, it looked like everyone was working hard and trying to put the bridge back on the original position, but it was all staged.
That's great. That's great. I didn't know you had dress rehearsal for moving a bridge, but I guess it makes sense. So after the bridge was moved, I know the work began on the substructure. Can you talk about what you did to fix, or what was done to fix those abutments?
Yeah, as Karen mentioned earlier, the north abutment, the one that had stone and concrete, that was the one of the hardest part of the project to get it constructed. We could have done a concrete abutment. It was going to be a lot cheaper to build, a lot easier to build as well, but the town chose not to do that. They wanted to replicate the other abutment that looked more in line with other type of structures that you see with covered bridges. So that was quite a process. He was required to get specialty stones of different sizes, and we had sizes anywhere ranging from 17 inches tall to 22 inches, and we ended up mixing them, matching them at different sizes so they would not look like it was all fabricated intentionally to those sizes. And the contractor went the extra mile to find the stone that would match closely. So the contractor went through a lot of effort to find a stone that would match the color of all the abutments, and also to not have the stone be too small. We had to make sure that the stone pieces were large enough to span from one joint to the other joint underneath it, and we had some requirements, and they definitely exceeded everything we asked on the plans. And it was very tricky to pick up those stone sections one by one. The heaviest one that I kept track was 30,000 pounds, or 15 tons, that they have to lift it. They had to arrange it such a way that you would line up with the stones underneath it. It had to be in smooth bearing underneath. So we had to do a lot of prep work before you could actually take that piece of stone and then drop it on other stone underneath it. So we had to make sure that it was going to line up. Places that it didn't, we ended up mixing some grout and leveling out some of those small depressions. That way we had uniform bearing. That abutment is going to be there for a very long time. I'm going to go on record here and just say that it's probably going to be there for 200, 300 years. It will not go anywhere. It's not going to be washed out by any flood. It was constructed really solid, and it's definitely going to outlast anything that we ever do on that abutment. And a lot of credit again goes to the contractor for taking the precautions they did and just doing the things that they did.
Great. So in April of 2021, I was there when you pulled the bridge back over the river. And now I'm wondering if that was staged as well.
That too, both, yes. We only make sure that the bridge was going to line up when it went back on the final position.
Oh, I remember when it was sliding back into position, Joseph, you were watching, there was a 1/2-inch clearance. It was very close.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? Because that was exciting for me to watch, and also a little nerve-wracking, because with the system that you were using, I thought, oh my God, if one of those cables snaps, it's not going to go well. But I don't know what I'm looking at, so maybe you could describe it a little bit.
Yeah, again, it was the same process that we moved it off the abutments. They had the rollers underneath the bearings at 4 district locations. And there was a channel, like a C-shaped piece of steel that was welded on the shoring system underneath it. So the bridge had no chance of getting off track because it was inside that U shape or the C shape on the side. He had no chance to go sideways or get off track. And then on the very end, we also had stoppers. So the bridge, if the cable snapped, just like you said, the bridge would not go too far because it would be a stopper inside the channel that would prevent it from sliding any further. So it's been done. It's been done on many other projects, much larger than this. And it's just another way of moving the bridge, essentially.
Great. The overall project included bringing the bridge up to a 6-ton live load, and as much as possible, you kept as much of the original timber that you could possibly save. Can you talk a little bit about how you save 167-year-old timber and what that means?
So going back to the federal funding discussion that we had earlier, there's a lot of different permitting agencies that we have to go through: New Hampshire DOT, FHWA, Federal Highway Administration. And one of the requirements that it's typical on those type of projects is the HSR. They call it the Historic Structures Report. So you basically have to analyze every member that you're going to have to do something with it. You have to document the existing condition and then what you're going to do to it. And then you want to minimize the removal of the historic fabric from the bridge. So we went through that process. It's very time consuming. At times you wonder, like, why am I going through documenting everything? But again, it's just making sure that you have a paper trail and someone knows that you went through the process and you followed the process, even though we know that we have to do that no matter what. Mm-hmm. So you go through all that detailed process, you document everything, and then you get in the field, and then you find out that you're always going to run into unforeseen conditions or things that you didn't anticipate. So we ran into a few things like that. We had to replace, I believe, a couple extra verticals and then maybe one diagonal that we had to replace. But we were planning on that. We knew that we were not perfect. We could not find every piece of rock that we could find because a lot of that rock is hidden between the members. Right. So we built into the contract enough quantities for the contractor to order some extra timber. That way, when we find something, we have it on hand and we don't need to wait several months to order that timber and get it on site, because none of the materials that we used on bridge are standard sizes. They're all weird dimensions that you cannot go to a lumber yard and be able to get it. So everything has to come from the mills, had to be dried. You had to have certain grading requirements, meaning that it had to be so strong. And it's very hard nowadays to get timber that's going to match an old piece of timber that was installed there 167 years ago. The one thing that's really mind-boggling to me is that back in the old days, you take some of those pieces of wood, and then when you cut a section on the very end of it, you count the rings. So each ring, it's a year of growth into that. So on some cases, you count 50, 60 rings per 1 inch. So that means that tree grew 1 inch over 50 to 60 years. Nowadays, when you go in the lumber yard, you'd be lucky if you get 7 or 8 rings per inch. So they harvest the forest. They want to grow trees faster. They want to fabricate wood faster. And this is what's happening. But the faster that wood grows, it's not as strong. It's not as dense as the old growth that we had on the covered bridge. So we specify all that. We make sure that when the timber comes on site, we check it, make sure it's graded properly and has the right specifications, because we don't want to put something that's going to fail after we leave there. So it's quite a process.
It is. And what other work was done on the Bement Bridge?
Other safety work that we addressed safety was the railing. That was a big one. There was hardly any rail, any guardrail to keep the vehicles from going over the sides of the abutments. So there was a lot of work. We had to cast concrete caps on top of the wing walls, and we had to, inside the concrete, we had to embed anchor bolts, and then we had to attach the base plate, and then the steel post, and then the wooden rail that was connected from one post to another one. So the town went the extra mile. They wanted everything to be aesthetically pleasing. They ended up paying a little bit more money to paint the steel black and make it more historic. there were a lot of paint options, but they chose to do the one that's going to last the longest. There we had to do powder coating, and there was a last minute change that we had to do, but we were lucky that the contractor had a fabricator that could do it. So that was a big aspect of safety that we improved the railing system. Another important thing that we did was the application of the fire retardant coatings. And the beauty of that is that you spend a little bit more money now to apply this coating through all the timber members, and it prevents the damage from any arson or from anything that could happen there as a result of the fire. So this product worked. I think I've showed it to Karen on the past. There's a YouTube video of the guy taking like a penny. He holds it on his hand. He's got 5 pieces of newspaper underneath it, and then he's got the penny on top of that. And then with a blowtorch, he melts the penny on his hand, and he doesn't burn the paper or his hand because he applied the fire retardant on that. So this product works, and it's cheap insurance, and it's well worth it to do it on the covered bridges. Mm-hmm. And I know National Historic Covered Bridge Preservation that Bill Cass from New Hampshire DOT leads. They recommended they actually pay a lot of different towns to apply it, and they give them a grant to apply this product. So it works. It's been proven to work. There was other work. The flooring was redone, the decking, new decking. Some of the floor beams were replaced, and other miscellaneous work. But majority of the work was the north abutment and the rehabilitation of the truss system to brace it and make it stronger and not rack as it used to from the snow load, basically stay square.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about the guardrails, it wasn't necessarily just the approach rails, was it? It was also the inside the bridge to keep cars from, hitting the side of the bridge on the inside. There's some large beams down at tire level that would prevent a car from damaging the side of the bridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we added the curbs. We call them the timber curbs. And the purpose of that is just to keep the car like center on the bridge and not necessarily veer off on the side and then start damaging some of the truss members or even some of the diagonal knee bracing on the side. Mm-hmm. So we've done that. And a lot of our clients, a lot of state DOTs love that detail. And we keep using the same detail without any changes. It's the same detail that we used 20 years ago. Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the truss. So the Bement Bridge is often described simply as a long truss, and a lot of people have taken issue with that. How would you describe the truss design?
Yes, there's a lot of history behind that statement that you just made. So back in the early 1800s, Colonel Steve Long, he was a U.S. Army engineer. He was out of Hopkinton, New Hampshire, so he's very local on the area. So he had a patent, and there's a lot of papers out there that you could search and find with his work. But he had a patent, and if you're a town back then and you had a need, you had to build a bridge, you had to pay Steve so much royalties, and then he had his own contractors that he had pre-qualified, similar to the pre-qualification process that we described earlier. So he had his own contractors, and then he would coordinate with them. They would get the bridge done, and then he would get the royalty. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the royalty was. I'm sure it changed over the years. It could not have been the same. But that's how he made money with the patent that he did. Over the years, what we've seen, and we've written papers on this, we presented on national conferences on this topic, on this very topic. What we've seen that over the years, a lot of towns did not want to pay their royalty. So they ended up changing the design. They ended up changing some of the details just not to have to pay the royalties to him. So we believe that Bement Bridge, it's not a true long truss. It's a modified long truss. The shape of the truss resembles the one that Steve Long had designed and patented, but it lacks the pre-stressing. And the pre-stressing is what makes it the long truss. It's very complicated to explain it on this discussion here, but there's a lot of theory that goes behind it. And it's just amazing that back in the late 1700s, 1800s, people could do this without any technology or software that we have nowadays to analyze the structures. It was just amazing and fascinating. But basically, just to describe it really, really brief, is that you introduce pre-stressing, or you take a member of the truss, you compress it in a way by adding the wedges on each end.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the live load, when the truck load or the any type of load, snow load gets applied on the bridge, then that member goes in reverse. The load goes in the reverse direction. So you essentially introducing additional capacity on the trusses. And it's a very creative way of doing it. We actually had a project 4 years ago now in New York State. That bridge was a true long truss, and that truss was pre-stressed. If you simply did the truss without the pre-stressing, it would not have worked. It would not have held the loads that he had to hold. So it made a difference on the longer spans. And that project was quite a span. It was 228 feet long. It's actually the longest single span covered bridge in the world that we designed on that project. And here we're talking 70 feet, so that pre-stressing was not really needed. And we went by without having to replicate and then pay to the family of Colonel Long any royalties for any of that work.
I hope none of them are listening to the podcast. So speaking about paying, the final project came to $1.6 million. And I know we talked about funding sources, but how did the town fund their portion? Karen, did they just do it from the tax base, or was there fundraising, or how did that work?
It was from the tax base, but it was done over a number of years. When the initial estimate of 772 was presented, the town's portion was going to be just under $31,000, which, when you think about that, that's a deal.
Right.
Ultimately, the $619,000 that was from the National Covered Bridge Grant, that was reduced to just under $570,000. So we had to kind of run around at the end and appropriate a little bit more money. But in the end, the New Hampshire Municipal Bridge Program funded $850,000. The town put in just under $208,000. So, for $1.6 million bridge, that is the heart and core of our community, $207,000 isn't too bad.
Right. Exactly.
And like I said before, we were fortunate to get all this extra funding to allow us to do this bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely did not take any shortcuts. Everything was done the right way of doing it. And the town always chose to do the right thing and not necessarily cutting corners or just doing enough to go by for a few years. The rehab was done for many generations to enjoy this bridge in the future.
It is a beautiful final product. I first went to that bridge in 2012, and when I went back to see it, it's so different. It's just brighter and, I don't know, fresher, stronger. It's just beautiful.
We did a lot of things that the contractor went the extra mile. The one that comes to mind, Karen, is when we installed one of the siding boards on the fascia that didn't quite match it. The color was a little bit off. And then I called you. I said, Karen, do you like this? Because every time you're going to drive by it, you're going to see it. It's not going to match. So they had taken the staging out at that point when you got back to me, and it was not easy to get back there and remove that board and then install a new one that would match in color. But Karen said, I don't like it. We should remove it. So I went back to the contractor that day and I said, Alan, I just don't like that board. He goes, funny that you say that, because I was thinking the same thing. He was bugging me. So he was thinking about that. So one of his guys, he took a 40-foot ladder, he put it against the siding, and he ended up replacing it. So that shows the extra effort that the contractor went through to make sure that everything was done properly. And everyone was happy too.
And it sounds like the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance was happy with it as well, because you received their award recently. Can you talk about that process?
Karen, do you want to say something, or?
You were the one who said, oh gosh, I put in for a couple of awards. And I think you put in for 4 awards for this bridge, and
We
New
got
Hampshire
3.
Preservation Alliance Award was the first one to come through, and that was very exciting.
Mhm.
But also the American Council of Engineering Companies of New Hampshire and Structural Engineers of New Hampshire acknowledged the work that Hoyle Tanner did on this project,
Oh,
which
great.
I think that's phenomenal. I mean, 3 of the
Mhm.
4, award programs recognize this bridge and Hoyle Tanner's work. It's exciting.
And I know there was a photo contest.
Yes.
How did that turn out?
I don't know yet. I think they were
Oh,
closing the voting in the past couple of days. I got an email saying, hurry up and vote.
okay.
But I have to say that I didn't recognize the bridge as being my bridge. In that photo, I had to zoom in and I was looking at it and then compared it to some other photos because of the way the photographer had captured it. It looked very different to me. But when you looked closely, you could tell it was definitely the inside of our bridge.
Right. And I love that you call it our bridge. That says so much about communities and covered bridges. Do either of you have any final thoughts on this project or anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Well,
I
aside
just want
from,
to
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead, Karen. You first.
I was just going to say, aside from the engineering and the hard work on the part of Hoyle Tanner, I know that Sean had spent some time out there. Joe had spent some time out there as well, a lot of time out there, and your care on the project, as well as all of the guys from Neil Daniels. That just all this work and effort and care went into this beautiful bridge. This whole it energized our community, and I was really impressed and amazed when we had the reopening celebration how much of the community came out. Even I figured that that some of the Daniels higher ups would come, but even the guys who actually did the work on the bridge came out to see this bridge reopened and the recognition. And I think that it just touched a lot of people. It brought a lot of people together. It was kind of, I think we opened it sort of at the tail end of COVID, and it was really kind of just a warm fuzzy feeling.
Mhm.
Yeah, that definitely was a great day, that grand opening. We went through from the beginning when we advertised the project and when we awarded the project. It was like the beginning of COVID, and we didn't know how everything was going to shake out with the materials not being available. And we had a lot of shutdowns on and off with people getting COVID, and precautions were a lot stringent than they're now. So there was quite a process. And then when we got out of that and having that great day where we had the grand opening, that was the day that we all strive for. We want to make sure that the community is going to enjoy this for many, many generations. And it was just great to see. I don't know how many people, at least like 80 to 100 people, I would say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it was just a great turnout from all the local community, and also from the people that actually did the work.
Mhm.
And during the process, people came out and stopped and looked at the bridge and watched the work. And there were people who I assume were heading down there weekly to kind of, okay, where are we at now? And that was fun. I think that people really, really enjoyed watching this project take place.
We
And
didn't
I
see
think,
those people too often during the work hours when the contractor was there, but I do recall that one weekend I took my daughters, and we took a detour, and I said, "Do you guys want to see a bridge that I'm working on?" So we stopped by, and it was like we were there for 15 minutes. 3 cars showed up, and they were just making their usual runs. They were just stopping just to check out the bridge, just to see how things are going. And I know a lot of that went after hours when we left, because when we were there, we didn't want any of the people to come close and get hurt. It was a safety issue. But once we left, everyone came over just to see, like, what did they do today? What they're going to do tomorrow? So that was very exciting.
That's great.
we are very proud of our bridge and the care that has been, put into it. And we've protected it now for future generations.
Mhm.
At least that north abutment's not going anywhere.
Well, thank you both so much for your commitment to this covered bridge and to other covered bridges as well, and being a part of this story. I think it's critical that communities come together and save these bridges and also be part of it, whether they're watching from afar or going to town meetings, paying taxes, working on the bridge, whatever it is. It takes everyone together, and this is a great example of that. And thank you for sharing that with me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Yes.
All right. Covered Bridges of New Hampshire is created by me and recorded in Hancock, New Hampshire. The song Old New Hampshire was arranged and performed by Josh Black. The introduction is courtesy of Greg Kretschmar. This podcast is a companion to my book, Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. You can find out more about the book, the podcast, blog posts, upcoming events, and an interactive covered bridge map at coveredbridgesnh.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. Please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kim Chandler. Thanks for listening.